Kia ora. Today I'm here with Tony Seba. Like most leaders in their field, Tony has many credentials. He's a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, a Stanford University lecturer, author, startup advisor, and a clean technology expert who believes we're on the brink of the biggest technological revamp since the Industrial Revolution. In his book, Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation, Tony predicts that conventional cars as we know them will be obsolete by 2030, as well as the current oil, nuclear, natural gas, coal, and electric utility industries. Tony has spent the last week talking to New Zealanders about his clean tech vision, and he joins me now. Tony, welcome to New Zealand.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure being here.
So you're saying in 15 years' time, conventional cars will not exist.
Yes.
Neither will the world's main modes of generating energy.
Yes.
How did you come to this conclusion? Can you walk us through your thinking behind this?
Yes. My field of work is disruption. Disruption caused by exponentially improving technologies. So what that means is if you look at your iPhone, at your cell phone, that is a product that has improved exponentially, 40% every year for the same dollar for the last 40 years, computing has. So the computing power that used to take a whole building now fits into a little phone. So when you look at exponentially improving technologies that go into new products and services, then you start thinking about disruption. And what disruption is these technologies taking over or destroying an existing market. Another example is how digital cameras disrupted film cameras. Now we don't take pictures with film anymore, it's all digital. So when you take some of the key exponentially improving technologies now, such as solar energy, such as electric vehicles, self-driving cars, sensors, artificial intelligence, and so on, when you put them together, then you start looking at massive radical changes in the way we generate, manage, use, and store energy in a way that has not been done in hundreds of years.
Okay, so with that, how soon could we expect new energy technologies to be affecting our lives? Like it's already happening now, but what can we expect to see in, 3 years' time?
Yeah, so the example of solar energy. Solar energy has been improving at 22%, essentially learning curve every 2 years, and the market for solar has been doubling every 2 years since 1970. Now, it's still 1 or 2% of the world's energy generation, but if you keep doubling every 2 years, essentially you become 100% of the world's energy supply in 7 doublings, right? That's 14 years. So we're looking at solar, which is decreasing costs exponentially, and with a market that's increasing, doubling every 2 years, to generate most of the world's energy, if not all of the world's energy, by about 2030. And that's disruptive. Essentially, that's going to make everything that we generate energy with obsolete. Now, the other quality of solar that no other form of energy has is that it's distributed. So essentially every house, every building, every parking lot, every warehouse can generate and store its own solar energy. So we don't need central generating stations anymore. And soon, within 3 or 4 years, the cost of generating on site will be cheaper, not just cheaper than the electricity that we buy from utilities. We're already there. It'll be cheaper than the cost of transmission. So if it's cheaper than the cost of transmission, it means even if you generate hydro or nukes or coal at zero, it still can't compete with solar generated in your home, right? So at that point, essentially the disruption happens and boom, within a few years, by 2030, all energy would be generated by solar, essentially. That's one type of disruption. That's the disruption in energy generation. The other one is the electric vehicle. The electric, as you know, the Tesla Model S, Tesla, an American company based in Silicon Valley, was the car of the year by Motor Trend magazine in 2013. Not the EV of the year, mind you, the car of the year. And Consumer Reports said that it's the best car that they have ever tested, ever in history. But of course, it's expensive. It's $80,000. So in the case of electric vehicles, we're looking at a different type of disruption. It's a product that's better than the gasoline vehicle, but it's more expensive. So what's happening there is that the costs are coming down very quickly, at about 16 to 20% per year, so that by and by the way, the Model S in the US is already outselling Mercedes, Audi, and BMW in its category. So when it achieves a certain price, it outsells all cars in that price category. So by 2017, Tesla's going to have a $35,000 EV that will have the performance of a Porsche 911 Carrera, that will need no maintenance, essentially, and the cost per mile of charging an electric vehicle is about a tenth of the cost of charging gasoline. So when you put all that together, essentially you look at the cost curve of electric vehicles. By just about 2024, essentially most new vehicles will be electric. And by 2030, all new vehicles will be electric because of that cost curve. They will be cheaper to buy, cheaper to use, cheaper to charge, and cheaper to maintain. That's disruptive, right? But as they say in the commercial, but wait, there's more. Because electric vehicles are essentially computers on wheels. Model S, for instance, has only 18 moving parts, whereas your car has 2,000 moving parts. So that's why your car breaks down so often. I mean, not yours, but the gasoline car, right? So essentially the EV is maintenance free and it only has a few moving parts. And that makes it also disruptive. It's essentially a computer on wheels. Every time you charge an electric vehicle, you're also downloading software. So folks who bought the Tesla, and I'm giving Tesla as an example, I don't own stock in Tesla or anything. You're downloading software that is making it self-driving. So the self-driving car is going to be another massive disruption. Now, because it's going to take you to work, take you back home, take your children to school, and so on, without needing to park, for instance. We spend a lot of money in cars today, but we leave them parked 96% of the time. What a waste of money. It makes no sense, right? So when we have self-driving cars, they're going to go from being 96% parked to 90% driving. So when that happens, there is no point in owning a car, because you can always call a car like an Uber or a Lyft and say, okay, get me here in 3 minutes and take me there, right? And they're going to do that 24/7 for a tenth of the cost of owning a car.
So you're saying that car ownership will also be like obsolete?
Exactly. So by 2030, essentially nobody's going to have to buy a car, even if you need transportation all the time. It's going to be what's called car as a service or mobility on demand. You're going to have it whenever you want to take you wherever you want at any time of day or night, but you don't need to own one. It's like having software in the cloud, software as a service, instead of having it in your computer. It's there all the time, but you don't need to own it, right? So when that happens, when most of us essentially share cars that are self-driving, that are going around all the time, the market for cars is going to shrink because we're going to need fewer cars. So the conventional car industry will shrink by about 80%. We'll have 80% fewer cars. We're going to have no need for parking, at least in the downtowns. Right? So 80% of that space is going to open up. Self-driving cars drive better than we do, than humans do already. I mean, at Stanford, we're building a car that is competing with race car drivers. Not just us, race car drivers. So they're that good. So they're going to have fewer accidents, far fewer accidents. I mean, the Google car has driven 700,000 miles and has not had a single accident. Actually, it had one. It was rear-ended by a human. But so when that happens, essentially, we're going to have fewer cars. They're going to be electric and they're going to be self-driving. And that combination is going to cause a massive disruption in the conventional car industry. So you add the solar thing with electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, and you have the whole industry disrupted over the next 10 to 15 years.
So with that thought in mind,
yes.
And I mentioned previously how you've given many public presentations, met with many Kiwi businesses about clean energy and about the technology you've just been talking about.
Yes.
What are people's reactions to your theory?
Yeah. First, it's a little bit of a shock. Because we have used the existing system of energy and transportation essentially for 100 years. But then when they look at the data, and this is all about data, I mean, I'm showing cost curves that already exist and extending them out into the future. And there's a logic to it. There's a rationality and data behind my arguments. It's not really about climate change or about, which I do care about, or about hoping or about anything like that. The numbers say that, and the same methodology that I'm using essentially has worked for the internet disruption, the web disruption, the cell phone and the digital camera disruption. So it's a methodology that has worked in other disruptions. So when they look at that, they go like, okay, it is happening, and it's happening very, very quickly. You always have the deniers, of course, as in anything in life. But on this trip to New Zealand, I was invited by the Electric Network Association, and I was invited by the Smart Grid Forum. And they have a vested interest in keeping the status quo. And yet, they want to know about the changes. So they're open and they're receptive to the changes, because you either disrupt, join the disruption, or you're disrupted, right? And you go out of business. So I've been very pleasantly surprised by how people have been open to my message here in New Zealand. Very much.
Oh, I guess that's a good lead for my next question.
Yes.
So renewable energy already plays a major role in New Zealand's energy market, accounting for more than 70% of what this country generates. Where do you think New Zealand is placed in this technology energy revolution?
Yeah, so New Zealand, so I've been coming to New Zealand for about 10 years, and I've been teaching entrepreneurship here. I'm on the board of a technology company in New Zealand. I know the market relatively well. There is a lot of entrepreneurship in New Zealand. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who are doing solar, who are doing electric vehicles and so on. What New Zealand is lacking is venture capital. Companies find that they can start raising angel funding to start the company, but then there's a massive gap in venture capital and they can't really grow their companies, and they run into trouble in that way. And many of them end up going to Silicon Valley, for instance, to grow their companies. So that's something that I have talked to the New Zealand government about. that they need to expand that gap in venture capital. But Kiwis are very, very inventive. They're very good at developing technologies. But there are gaps that need to be filled to take their companies to the next level, both within New Zealand and worldwide.
So, do you think that new energy technologies will increase our standard of living, and not just in developed countries, but globally?
Yes, absolutely yes. And in many ways. I mean, one is, for instance, oil, gas, coal pollution. According to the International Monetary Fund, kills 7 million people every year.
Yeah.
Right? So once we go 100% clean, you have 7 million people per year we're going to live. That is awesome. I mean, that in and of itself would justify going 100% clean, right? The other thing is that between energy and transportation, it's basically $12 trillion of expenditures per year in oil and in gas and so on and so forth. Once we move from car ownership to car sharing, you don't need to spend $30,000, $40,000 in a car. You spend a tenth of that for your transportation needs for the same level of transportation. That means you keep that money in your pocket, not in the pocket of the car companies. When we go to solar energy, the sunshine is free, right? So far. Not many countries have taxed, some countries have, the sunshine, but it's free, which means we're going to save $8 trillion per year in energy, and that is going to stay in your pocket. So your standard of living and those of your kids and most people who are not selling oil today are going to rise massively, because we're going to keep all that money and spend it on things that we want to spend it on: healthcare, education, travel, whatever it is you want to do, not just dump it in an oil field. Yeah.
So last but not least,
Yes.
if there was one piece of advice that you could give
Yes.
to energy companies looking to get ahead of this clean tech revolution, what would that be?
Yeah, that would be join the disruption. The disruption is happening. It's not something in the future. It's already happened. There are examples in Germany already of big energy companies that already have been disrupted, and that's because Germany is ahead of the curve in both solar and wind. And they did not believe in the disruption, and they were disrupted. So they had to spin off the old energy business, and that is going to happen in every single market, in every single country in the world. So the advice is join the disruption, join solar and EVs and self-driving cars, or be disrupted, be put out of business. That's the advice.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much for talking to us.
My
Tony.
pleasure. Thanks for talking to me.